Hello, welcome to Reckless Rain. My name is Ray and I try things and show the process here for your entertainment. When it comes to this video, here's what you should know about me. I like Monster High. The original G1 ghouls have a special place in my heart. I like collecting dolls, I like fashion, character design is one of my favorite things, and I like making stuff. Doll customization is a multimedia art form, which allows for multiple avenues to explore. So let's talk about inspiration and initial ideas. I'm starting with Laguna Blue, who is actually doll number 3 in my lineup. I'll explain more about that later. Basically, the idea for this series is that all of them are in their early 20s or college age. I myself am in my early 20s, so I thought it would be easier to keep everything kind of cohesive. I think it's also interesting to think about where they would be after Monster High, if that makes sense. I plan to recreate a total of 28 characters in my style, maybe more if the inspiration hits and if I feel like I have extra time. This is the base character that I'm working from. Being that I do like the original dolls from G1, there are several elements that I wanted to keep. I liked the platform shoes, the swimwear look, and the flower in her hair. I also intend to keep the original skin tone, eye color, and hair color from all of the ghouls throughout this series. It's important to me that she keeps her monster looks, and while considering what I would do to keep that, I almost gave her a fishtail or like the option to swap a mermaid tail for her legs, but I decided that it was too mermaid versus sea monster. She's a fish though, so I decided that she would probably have alopecia, meaning that she would have no hair at all because she's a fish. I wanted her overall look to be more on the butch side versus on the feminine side, and I knew I still wanted her to be a swimmer, so the outfit is based on athleisure/swimwear. I like to think that she's sponsored by a swimwear company, so she's always repping their stuff. I did keep some ocean elements in her shell necklaces, and at the end of it all, I gave her a curly wig, a flower, a sports top, Hawaiian shirt, shell accessories, smartwatch, and board shorts, and platform sandals. Now let's get into the project. I start with Wave 1 G3 Laguna as my base. I like G3's articulation and body diversity, and these dolls are readily available in stores where I live now, so that makes sourcing much easier, and it's easier to keep everything consistent that way. I've already prepped and cleaned almost all of my base dolls that I'll be using for this series off camera, so I won't have any of that process available during the main videos. I do plan on making a separate how-to video on that sometime in the future though, so you will all have that to look forward to. Now, I had started rerouting with nylon hair from dollyhair.com. I'm not sponsored, but these are the colors for anyone interested. Before I had decided that I actually wanted her to be bald, so I had to pull out all of these strands by hand. I saved what I could because I already had less hair available than when I started. You can thank my cats for that. This wig took me out back and called me names, bro. I had nothing but issues start to finish. Let me show you what I mean. I took a spare Lagoona head from a different project and secured it onto a broken chopstick, which I stuck in a tiny vase. I laid down some plastic wrap to protect the head and took a piece of thin, stretchy fabric and stretched it over the whole head, securing it with a hair tie. Then I coat everything with 2 layers of Mod Podge, paying attention to where the hairline would be. I was on autopilot initially and just started making hair wefts with glue, but I wanted them to be much thinner than this method typically allows. Then I remembered you can just sew wefts. Or so I thought. This made a huge mess and kind of wasted a lot of time and hair. I didn't use the right stitch, I think, and kind of rushed it. So my next thought was, naturally, I'll try melting the ends. So I powered up my hottest flat iron sitting at 420 degrees and started chomping at the ends. This worked okay, but it became more of a melted mess than a weft. I didn't want to give up on this idea though, so I pulled out my clothes iron and turned it all the way up. I have no idea what this temp got up to, but it definitely melted way more than the last one did. Still a mess though, so I wanted to call it a wash. I did decide to try one more thing though, as a last-ditch effort before going back to the glue method. I've had experiences with 100% acetone absolutely destroying plastic before, so I thought I may be able to melt the ends with it. This also did not work. It wasn't the right kind of plastic, I guess. Oh well, back to glue. I laid what hair I had left flat on a bag and glued a straight line down the middle. I swear I turned away for a second, and when I turned back, my stinky cat jumped onto the hair and made a huge mess of it. I was able to recover most of it though, thankfully. After they had dried, I cut them all down as thin as possible and trimmed them to size. Then I got to work gluing with gel super glue from the base of the neck upwards. It's very important that you don't use the liquid stuff, just the gel stuff, because you will glue your hands to everything. Once I got higher up on the wig, I started adding more wefts with blue streaks in them and worked my way up towards the part. Once there, I brought out the longer wefts that I had saved specifically for the part. I glued one weft to the left side, then glued another to the left as well, but flipped it over to the opposite side and pressed it down with a butter knife I had heated with a flat iron. With some shaping, trimming, and mussing, the gluing was done. I set it aside to let the glue cure before moving right on to styling. I wanted tight, natural-looking curls, so I decided to try my hand at the pipe cleaner method. I gave the hair a light misting of water to make it more manageable and got started. At this length, I found that one pipe cleaner could be bent into 3 rollers, so to speak. I would take a small strand and wrap it in a spiral, twisting as I go. After the whole wig was in curlers, I paid special attention to these 2 strands at the front of the wig. These I wrap differently because I'm using them to make the big curl/bang. I keep the strand flat and wrap upwards and in towards the root. Once those were done, I took everything and dipped it into boiling hot water, then cold water off camera. I switched between hot and cold about 2 times before setting the head aside to dry overnight. I came back the next day and unwrapped everything. I split some of the curls, brushed some of them, left some of them as is, resulting in this natural looking curl pattern. After this, I move on to styling the big curl/bang. I begin by brushing it out like you would for a vintage style. This allowed me to understand how the curl wanted to lay, which helped with laying the curl in a way that it wanted to go, instead of fighting with it. After that, I start pinning the curl in place with pins. I protect the face with a piece of paper towel, then take a mixture of glossy Mod Podge and water and carefully spray it onto the curl. The glossy Mod Podge helps keep it looking like hair versus looking sticky or flaky. I let it all dry again, and with some trimming, shaping, and general mussing again, I called it done. This was my first time trying this curling method, and I really liked how it turned out. My only beef with this method is that some strands would get knotted into the fuzzy part of the pipe cleaner, and I'd have to cut them off to get the rest of the curl free. Overall though, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Next, I move on to the painting/body mods. The only modification I had to make this time was to fill the factory reroot holes in the head. Everything else was just painting related. So I mix up some epoxy sculpt with gloves off camera. The dangerous part usually happens during the mixing process, so you want to for sure protect your skin during that time. But honestly, you should probably wear gloves anytime you handle epoxy sculpt. In this case, it's more of a do what I say and not what I do situation. I mixed the epoxy with water and created this paste that I pressed into all of the holes and seams. I decided to call it good enough so that I could move on to one of my favorite parts, which was painting the body. I've been customizing for a few years at this point, so I've tried my hand at plenty of methods and ideas and learned from my extensive failures and from others. That's what failure is for, after all. So I believe I've perfected this method. I started by sanding the body to add tooth for the paint to hold on to. Then I mixed 50% Mod Podge, 50% white gesso, and laid one layer over the whole body. I remembered at this point that I wanted to keep the gradient on her legs. I did bring it down a little bit lower though, past her fins, as I thought it looked more natural that way. Off camera, I mixed the skin tone in a resealable container using slightly watered down Liquitex acrylic paints. I highly recommend that you do mix the paint in something that will keep it fresh long term, as mixing a 100% custom color again is pretty much impossible, and you never know when you'll need to touch up something throughout this process. Off camera, I started painting the body with an angled makeup brush. It's used for blush, I believe. This helps significantly reduce brush strokes. Then I took a cheap makeup sponge, got it wet, and squeezed out the excess to help it absorb the paint better. Then I dipped it in the paint and tapped in the excess. With this method, I was able to completely eliminate any brush strokes on the head, which is important as it helps keep everything looking higher quality. I also used the sponge to add the gradient back to her legs. Everything else was done off camera for the most part, so I broke everything down on this sheet of paper. Step 1. Sand the body. Step 2. Paint on Mod Podge gesso mixture. Step 3. Paint on 2 to 4 layers of Liquitex acrylic. Quality paint helps with durability. Step 4. 1 coat of clear matte spray paint on the hard plastic body only. Remove hands and forearms as they are a different plastic type and will get sticky from canned spray paint. Step 5. 2 to 3 coats of Duraclear matte varnish on hands and forearms. Step 6. 3 coats of Duraclear matte varnish on legs where the gradient is. Step 7. 1 extra coat of Duraclear matte varnish on problem areas that will get scratched as you pose the doll. So shoulders, rib joint, hips, knees, wrists, etc. Step 8. 1 layer of Mr. Super Clear UV flat over the whole body. Step 9. 2 layers of MSC on the head. When you don't rush it, like I did, there should only be a few places that are scratch. With everything sealed, I can start blushing the body with purple chalk pastels. I always shred my pastels directly onto a piece of sandpaper and mix them from there. Next, I take a dense makeup brush and go over each joint and the tips of the fingers. This adds a layer of dimension to the paint job, in my opinion. I also go over her stomach and add muscle shading as a nod to her athletic swimmer nature. Lastly, I add a deep blue gradient to her fins and later to her ears. While I had the pastels out, I also started blushing the face. I add pastels on her cheeks and go over her nose to give a sun-kissed look and... well, what is that? It seems that I should have protected the other pieces on the table when I sprayed that glue/water mixture. Okay, fine. I had to stop what I was doing, wiped the mess off with a wet Q-tip, and sprayed another layer of MSC before I could resume. I then got to work placing the blush again, and added blusher on her forehead like bronzer. I've seen a few influencers with alopecia do this, and thought it would add a cute flair to the face. I also add a deep teal color to her top lip to match my concept art. You know how some fish have like a defined upper lip, kind of like this guy, but like yassified, you know? Now I can move on to the freckles. I assume that since she's a swimmer, she'd be outside getting sun, so freckles are a nice touch in my opinion. I also have freckles all over my body, so I just like adding freckles to characters. To do this, I mix a watery acrylic and dip the front end of a toothbrush in, tapping off any major excess. Then I carefully pull the bristles back, allowing the paint to organically spread over the entire body and face. This method works great, but will often leave some big blobs or splotches of paint that take away from the natural look. I remove these with a wet Q-tip and remove freckles in areas that probably wouldn't be getting much sun. Because I didn't seal the blush before this step, I had to go back over the stomach with more pastel. I also decided to take some of that same paint that I used on the freckles and paint short nails onto her fingertips. Finally, I take everything outside and spray another coat of MSC. I was building pigment and sketching out features on the head off camera when I noticed it started to look messy and kept looking worse as I went. I'd been telling myself that it was fine, but I really needed to fix the dents and divots on the head. So I reluctantly mixed more epoxy and flattened it all over the head, smoothing with water as I went. I sanded it and it was looking pretty good, but I just needed to see it all in the same color to see if I missed a spot. And I did. Luckily there was just a small crevice to fill, but how do I fill it? I don't really want to mix up more epoxy. I then remembered my husband had this stuff in our closet. Basically, you mix it with water and it turns into like a multi-purpose concrete. I decided to mix it with Mod Podge instead of water since I wanted it to be sturdy. Although looking back, I literally could have just painted the Mod Podge over the stuff after I had sanded it, since it was difficult to sand with the Mod Podge mixed in. I sanded it all and carefully painted the skin tone back on. I just decided to cover the whole face up with this stuff and start fresh since nothing was building up correctly. Now it's time to actually start work on the face up. I sealed the new paint with another layer of MSC and just repeat everything that I did the first time, but I was locked in this time. And boom, we're back to how it was before, but better. I add a light green around her waterline to shore up my lines, then start right in with gouache paints. I saw Delightful use gouache a few years ago and have done so ever since. I like it a lot. Gouache gives the opacity of acrylic but with the flexibility of being able to wipe it all away, like with watercolor pencils. I add the sclero with a watery white, paint the upper lash line sketch with a deep indigo, and add the irises with a medium green. With a dark blue watercolor pencil, I draw in little lashes on her lower lash line according to the concept art. I go over the lash line and lowered lashes with a charcoal acrylic, and add light green acrylic to the irises, leaving an outer ring of that darker green. I highlight the lower curve of the irises with a yellow-green, and dot on her pupils with that same black acrylic. Next, I sketch in her eyebrows with a yellow pencil, and then lock in and just paint them directly in with blonde-colored acrylic. While acrylic is still wet, you can take a wet Q-tip and wipe most of it off, which I did in a couple of places while painting in the eyebrows. I actually didn't realize until way later that all of my Monster High girls so far have basically the same eyebrows. I tried to highlight her eyelid with a pastel green to give like a shimmer effect, but after I spray MSC, you'll see it just disappears. I shade the whole eye with a navy blue to add dimension and add the two highlights I always give my dolls. One round highlight near the top of the eye, and a shooting star-like streak near the bottom of the eye. After this, I'll add the finishing touch. Dry brushed pearlescent white onto her ear fins. And with another spray of MSC to seal everything in, the face-up is done. I add the finishing touches to the body next. I draw in gills with watercolor pencil to match the concept art. I actually forgot about this detail until now, otherwise I probably would have sculpted them. I also dry brush that same pearlescent white onto her arm scales, fins, and the clear part of her legs and feet. Then I seal the whole thing with a final layer of MSC. So that's wig, face, and body. Now onto the clothes and accessories. Before I dig into making everything by hand, I check the bag of accessories that came with the 2 Laguna dolls that I have, to see if there's anything that I can recycle. Ultimately, the first wave bag and shoes, the journal, the water bottle, her eye coffin smartphone, and the one-piece swimsuit fit with my vision. I also stole the board shorts from my Heath Burns Beach doll. I have this Buried Secrets Frankenstein doll that I thought had more articulation when I bought her, but she doesn't, so I can't really use her for a project. This actually makes her a great mannequin doll though, because I don't have to worry about the joints bending all the time. I put the shorts and swimsuit onto the mannequin and mix black acrylic paint and fabric medium together. I think it's supposed to be 2 parts medium, 1 part paint, but I didn't measure at all. I paint a few layers onto both items and let them dry for about a day. Even after they had fully dried, the shorts ended up being kind of sticky, probably because I didn't measure properly. To remedy this, I pulled out an old trick from when I was a kid. I had this Ken doll that had rubber legs, and child me often had a hard time putting any clothes on the poor guy, so eventually we coated the legs in cornstarch, which eliminated the stickiness. I did that same thing to the board shorts off camera, brushing off the excess, and it worked great. It also made them look like real board shorts, which I liked a lot. I tried and failed twice to make my own sports bra pattern. I don't quite understand how to make clothes and patterns, so I just improvised, which ended in disaster. Then I decided to purchase Delightful's t-shirt and jeans pattern off of Etsy. I ended up modifying the base portion of the standard G3 t-shirt pattern. I kinda zoned out for this part, so I don't remember exactly what I did. Basically, I cropped it, changed the neckline to be a V-neck, cut the armholes until it looked right, and sealed the edges with varnish, which acted as a fray check. Then I sewed it all together and added Velcro to the back. This whole time, I had been struggling on how I wanted to make the ribbed pink fabric that went on her waistband and the band of her sports bra. Then I realized I was just making this way too complicated. I literally had ribbed white cotton fabric in my stash that I could just color to be the right pink and glue it on. So I did just that. Normally, I wouldn't be recommending just gluing clothes together because I just used to hot glue pieces together before I decided I should probably sew it. But if I were to sew this on like you would on real clothes, it would be too bulky and kind of look ugly. so it's allowed in this case. Next, I colored white embroidery thread to be turquoise, using the same method as everything else. I added the turquoise details to the outfit using glue. I glued it to the top's neckline and to the outer seam and pocket area on the shorts. I made a small bow with black embroidery thread and marked 2 little dots with a gel pen. With the bow glued between the dots, it now looks like the waistband cinches with string. Cute! With that same pattern from Delightful's Etsy, I modified the G3 Abbey pattern to become an oversized Hawaiian shirt instead of a plain t-shirt. It worked great and was only mildly tedious. Mostly because my sewing machine kept jamming and tangling because it's touchy. The modifications I made include not cutting the front piece on a fold, making 2 pieces instead of 1, sewing the back pieces together instead of attaching Velcro, and winging it on the collar, resulting in it not being sewed on correctly. I ended up gluing this piece of ribbon from the stash to cover up the mistake, and moved on to paint all the hot pink wave details onto the edges. I stole these chunky gems from this old hair bow that I had in my stash, glued them to the side I wanted them on, and painted them to match everything else, making little buttons. Now on to accessories. I had already started work on the shoes before I even started the reroute, so I don't have all that footage. But all I did was cut off the straps and sloppily added some quickly drying leftover epoxy sculpt. Because I was rushing at the time, I left my future self with a lot of sanding and carving. I had to wait to paint all of the accessories until every single one of them were done, because I was mixing custom paints again. So, in the meantime, I worked on the jewelry. The Wave 1 doll came with this cowrie shell necklace that matched the concept art. Like the ones that were so popular in the early 2000s, I actually own one myself. All I had to do was repaint it a little to make it look more realistic. I also seal it with varnish once I'm done. Next, I work on the white shell fragment necklace. Essentially, I rolled out some polymer clay and cut it into a bunch of little chunks. Then I carefully thread each uncooked piece onto a needle and thread with a knot at the end. Honestly, this method sucked, so I decided to pre-bake the clay to get it a bit more solid. That helped somewhat, but it still sucked low-key. Eventually, it was ready to try on the doll. I made a round piece of foil and set the necklace on there to bake fully. It came out too loose, so I thought I could just super glue a piece of wire onto it. The wire was too thick, so I tried putting it onto a ring of hot glue. This also did not work. Shocker. I ended up just trimming it to the best of my ability and turned it into a bracelet instead. Oh well. Next, the watch. I could have sworn that I had a plastic bracelet from another doll somewhere, but all I could find was this star bangle from Claudine. I'll just say that it didn't work, so I made one out of polymer clay. It turned out fine, other than being a bit too small and shattering, like, super easily, several times. I was low-key just trying to get it done, so at this point, it's whatever. I cut the drips off her bag and cut the thumb grip off of the phone. Now it was time to paint the accessories. Everything got 3-ish coats of this pink that I mixed to match the waistband color. Once dry, I lay a wash of black acrylic paint over the backside of the phone and over the whole bag. This worked great for the bag, but made the phone look super muddy. Oops. I move right on to paint the phone screen and add turquoise to the front. I painted turquoise onto the bag straps, the watch, and the shoes, and I also added a small line of purple between the pink and turquoise on the shoes to help smooth the transition and to add a level of shadow. Next, I seal everything with about 2 layers of the matte varnish and let it dry. All that was left were the shoe straps. Super easy, right? Right, guys? Right. Well, I actually don't have the footage of how super easy it was, since I was just trying stuff out. Initially, I tried to do the Tiva style straps that I had in my concept art using glue-stiffened black embroidery thread. That was a disaster. So I just made these simple straps using ribbon. All that's left now is to assemble the pieces, and I think I'll call this doll done. Overall, I'm pretty cool with how she came out. The clothes really do look amazing. I really took my time with everything. And the body and face up worked out great in the end. The only criticisms I have were super minor. The wig ended up being the wrong shape for her new head, and thanks to the epoxy buildup, it was kind of annoying to deal with. So I actually just stuck some blue sticky tack in there to hold it on. The shoes gave me issues because after I shaved so much of them down, they weren't really foot-shaped, and of course the straps kept breaking and I had to re-glue them several times. The other thing that kind of flopped was the watch. I didn't make it to be the right size around, and it ended up shattering several times. I had to re-glue it, and it just shattered in the same places. I probably could have just reinforced it with fabric, but after the photo shoot, I ended up just super gluing it onto her since I figured I wouldn't need to remove it for anything. All that said, I really like it. She came out pretty much exactly as intended, if not better. I also added some finishing details to that suit I mentioned a while ago. I just didn't record any of it. Here she is with Frankie and Abby, the other two ghouls that I made before I started seriously recording. And let me know what you think about this Laguna redesign in the comments below. I'll be posting more this winter and throughout the next year, so please feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of thing. You can also follow me on Instagram at reckless_rain, where I'll have the photo shoot and a carousel, and you'll get to see sneak peeks of my concept art. And with that, I will see you all in the next video. Bye!